Hello, I'm Dr. Bob Lynn, and I'm here uh, with Scott, to Chief Scott, who also told me that I shouldn't call him Chief Scott. So I'm gonna just gonna call him Scott because he's now become not just Chief Scott to me, but also Friend Scott. So Scott Allen is here with me, uh, and we're going to present a hopefully formative and interesting talk regarding the police and the role of the police in today's tumultuous times. Let me start by introducing you to the First Responder Network, which was put together in part by C4 Recovery Solutions, uh, and I believe that this is one of the most important forums, not just because Scott and I are on it, and this is part of a series, but because I think not enough attention is being given to the needs of first responders, and we do that because we go through our lives and we tend to take first responders for granted. We assume that they're going to be there when we need them, and unfortunately, most of the time they are. But during these times, and I mean what I mean by these times is the combination of COVID, cultural issues, uh, lack of resources, etc. All of these things that are coming together at one point, at one that is creating a perfect storm, if you will, for stress. And that's what we want to talk about today is about that perfect storm for stress. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, but not bore you with the details of 50 years of uh, fighting the good fight. But I've been a psychologist and counselor and sociologist and researcher for more than 50 years. And so I've seen a lot of things happen, and I've watched through different kinds of kind of the roller coaster, if you will, of cultural and individual stress among first responders. And now, just for a moment, I'm going to take you back to the '60s, and I know that's way back, and but I think it's important because I'm also a person who, you know, is a first responder. I was a first responder for 9/11 and a lot of other places, but I also have a military background as well. And when I came back, when we talked about in the '60s, not only did we have stress in the '60s, but we had very similar cultural issues that we were dealing with. We did not, people who came out of the military in the '60s did not come out as unsung heroes. They actually came out, you know, and were subject to unsubstantiated ridicule. And the police at the time were going through similar cultural stress, and that was also really important. And it took many years to get to the point where now we see somebody from the military and we quickly say thank you for your service, and we mean that in a heartfelt way. But it took us all these years to get to that place. And at the same time, the police were still out there facing what they were facing every single day. And because of a combination of events, they went from hero in people's minds to zero. And that is another piece of the stress that the police are dealing with today. And the point is that you know we all, most people just don't have a serious appreciation for how the police are really the backbone uh, of stability in our society. How is the police that allows my wife to drive uh, to the supermarket every day and feel safe and comfortable, and knowing that if things did happen to her car, if she was in trouble in some ways, that somebody would be there for her. So I think we need to talk about that a bit as well. Uh, And that's just the background I wanted to give you for this conversation that I'm going to have with Scott. And I'm going to ask you, Scott, if you could just give us some thoughts about your history, because you have quite an exciting history and have done such important work. If you could talk to us about your time on the job and what brought you to what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Bob, for the introduction and the opportunity to sit here, and thank you to the C4 and the First Responders Network. To me, it's a critically important venue for first responders to have a place to go to share and learn from others. And before I introduce myself, I want to thank you, for your service in the Army. I in particular in November here, I don't think we thank our veterans enough. And I didn't serve in the military, but certainly, I had family members that did, and I to your point on law enforcement, I feel like we don't tell our veterans enough how much we thank them for the service. So thank you for that. My name is Scott Allen. I recently retired in January of this year from the East Bridgewater Police Department in Massachusetts, and geographically, we're located halfway between Boston and Cape Cod. I spent the past 26 years in law enforcement, had a brief, short stint as a corrections officer before I moved on to the local municipal police department. And then I did a short time in patrol and spent the majority of my career as a detective, drug detective, major crimes investigator, and worked my way up through the ranks. I was a sergeant for 13 years. And then the last 4 years of my career, before retiring in January, I was the chief of police of a department, a small size department, 25 full-time officers, about 35 full-time employees. But, kind of typical across the country of a typical police department. Coincidentally enough, my background, my undergrad was in teaching. I was going to be a teacher my goal initially was to be a teacher and a football coach. And, I very much, sports played a big role in my life growing up. And as I, worked my way through my teaching experiences as a student teacher, I decided I was looking for a new challenge, but teaching and instructing has always been something I'm passionate about. And over the past 8 years, first as a sergeant, then as the chief, I organically got involved with our local substance use coalition in my community in 2012, and really started to learn about behavioral health issues that I had no real experience on, or looking at it from a different perspective. As a drug investigator, the tool in our tool belt was we make arrests, we seize drugs, we put people in and take them off the streets, and that we're having an impact. And, from 2012 through 2020, I really experienced a shift in my philosophy on policing, and really looking at things from a different perspective. I learned how important, using proper language with substance use disorders and mental health disorders, and learning about stigma and how strong it is. And so as I evolved in this, new field of pre-arrest diversion deflection, helping connect those in suffering from substance use disorders and mental health disorders to treatment and long-term recovery, I started to look at things from a different perspective, and really looked at the behavioral health experts as the people that I wanted to rely on to change the way we address those issues. And it led to me having this opportunity in January to retire, to pursue my passion, to work with others in the behavioral health field, helping others train and mentor, communities in changing how they approach behavioral health issues. Unfortunately, when I retired, COVID had not yet hit. And, shortly after I retired, COVID, came upon us, and has really obviously changed all of us from a significant, perspective. But in my new endeavor, I am looking to help others, look at substance use and mental health disorders from a different perspective, and to really connect people to treatment and long-term recovery. And that's my goal in my new initiative. And with
How does your organization do that? Can you tell us more about your organization and?
Our company is called Community Services Solutions, and our foundation program is called Operation to Save Lives. And what we've created is a team of law enforcement, public safety experts, and public health, behavioral health experts who have worked, to help others, form multi-sector collaborations to address substance use and mental health disorders. In my work in my community, we're part of a county called Plymouth County. We have 27 cities and towns. And in 2015, in smaller pilots, I started working with behavioral health experts to connect people struggling with substance use disorders, opioid use disorder, and overdoses, and then their family members and loved ones with the resources that existed. So now what we do under Operation Save Lives is we help mentor and train other communities, other counties to work cohesively and eliminate those silos. And we do that through curriculum that we've created. We do that through, a database that we can help share information, because what I saw early on in 2012 was everyone wanted to help others and do it for the right reasons, but there was no mechanism or no venue for us to do that, because so much of this behavioral health and public safety, law enforcement work is being done in silos. So it's really bridging those gaps and removing those barriers to connecting people to treatment. I mean, in my community, we went from, zero opioid deaths to nearly double digit deaths in a small community. And in Massachusetts, the Northeast, we were particularly hit hard by the opioid crisis. But as I learned about substance use disorder as a disease, I also recognized that it wasn't just substance use disorder. There was co-occurring mental health disorders, identifying, domestic violent victims and suspects who would have these co-occurring disorders, identifying drug endangered children, all of these different issues that were occurring at the same time, and then somehow creating a mechanism to help organizations collaborate to address all of those disorders, which is what I'm now doing in my new venture.
Scott, that sounds brilliant. I'm wondering, based on your comment about stigma and the whole idea that police are not often seen as the people who give service, who create, who solve problems, but never the people who have their own problems solved. I was wondering, in an organization like yours, what do you do to attract people? How do you get people into your organization?
It's challenging right now. Before COVID, and then followed by the social justice issues that we're now collectively addressing as a country and as a world right now. It was a challenge to hire and retain people. When I came on in 1994, these law enforcement jobs, were very, competitive. It was very difficult to get these jobs. When just prior to my retirement, these last 2 years, I struggled to hire and retain positions. And my fellow colleague chiefs across not only our state of Massachusetts but across the country were experiencing those similar struggles. Where we couldn't, everyone have vacancies in our departments. So it is a struggle because, unfortunately, these jobs, are we respond to people in crisis. And it's what I think goes unrecognized at times is, we're tasked with solving a problem and doing it in a short period of time, knowing that the stresses that those situations create for everyone involved, including the officers, those stresses stay with those individuals after they clear that scene. And in these small municipal departments and in the large urban departments, far too often I don't think we recognize the stress and the impact that it has on our officers. And, just like in law enforcement, we've seen this shift, and the shift I'm talking about 2012, 13, 14, 15. We listened to the experts that said, look, substance use disorder is a disease. I was never taught that, never heard that in the police academy and my trainings. Just like we've been able to recognize that, with stress and the impact that stress has on officers, we in law enforcement and at the leadership level need to recognize that stress has a significant impact on police officers, and it does present challenges in getting people not only to take these jobs but to maintain these jobs. I mean, I just read
Absolutely.
an article, recently, and in my own state, we're having people in mass exodus retire at 5-10 times the rate that we would typically experience in a year. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And, certainly it's presented some challenging times for us in law enforcement.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's Scott. I was wondering. So you have a recruitment challenge, how do you get people to your service, people who are in need of your service? In other words, if someone is experiencing the need to be connected to a treatment resource, how do you get those folks to take advantage of the services that you're providing?
Well, I think one of the things that we learned early on, and when we were talking with the public health experts, there was a really engaged dialogue on, you know, you're police officers, you're the enforcement piece, and we looked at it differently, and I looked at it differently. We're police officers, but I look at our role as community police officers. Authentic community engagement is interacting with the community. And what we did is we brought the resources to the front door of those in that were suffering from substance use disorder. But as important, if not more importantly, is the family members and the loved ones of those struggling. Because what we found early on is that, we were told, geez, you're forcing people, you're going to houses you shouldn't be going to. What we found was just the opposite. We would go to a house with a plainclothes police officer, a certified recovery coach, or clinician. And what we found is moms and dads and those in need would welcome us in and sit down at the front, in their living rooms and at their kitchen tables. And what we learned is by showing that we cared, that we were human beings that have problems just like those that were in the throes of the crisis. And what I found was that by showing that compassionate and that caring attitude, it people welcomed us in. I was fortunate before I became chief as a sergeant, as part of our initiative. I did 30 visits of those in crisis. And I had one negative interaction out of those 30. And when all was said and done, the one negative, it wasn't even negative. It was actually a positive, because months later, that individual came to me and said, you know what, I was resistant to talking to you because, I had, previously had experience with him in a law enforcement interaction. But what he said later on was, thank you for coming, because it really changed my view of the police and your role in this. And, that person ended up connecting to care and treatment. So it's showing that care, that humanity, the passionate, caring for a fellow, citizen of your community.
Well, we know that. Thank you, Scott. We know that suicide among the police is higher than in law enforcement than in any other profession. And as you point out, substance use disorder, 65% of those folks who do commit suicide or have suicide attempts or also have a co-occurring addiction problem. So we know that those issues that you're talking about are really at the top of the list in terms of the symptoms that people have. And at the same time, we'd like to get further upstream. And it's really wonderful to have services that react to the needs of police when they have them. And we also need to talk about some of the upstream kinds of interventions. We know, for instance, that there are really two kinds of and obviously there's a continuum, but basically we can break stress into two different areas. One is the reactive stress, the stress you have on a daily basis. You go out into the job, you're faced with a situation, and that can range anywhere from dealing with domestic violence to witnessing a death. I mean, there's the whole continuum there that can happen. But what happens during quote normal times, if there is such a thing, is that you come back and then you rebound. This is something you do on a daily, and this is something you were trained to do. This was part of what you got signing on to this job. And in some ways you develop a lifestyle that allows you to rejuvenate, to come back to zero, to come back to a place where you're now feeling okay to make it to the next day. And in a lot of the work that people are given enough time off to come back and to deal with those kinds of issues. But there's also another kind of stress that's even more important, and that we weren't prepared to deal with given all of these circumstances, and that's the accumulative effect of stress. And that's the one thing that we get into, and we get into a real serious case of denial when it comes to that. And I'll tell you why in a second. But the point is that, it's like you have a kid with a backpack, and he's walking down the road, and someone puts a rock in his backpack, and he doesn't even know it's there. But the next day, someone puts another rock in, and then another one, and then on the 30th day, someone puts a little pebble in and he falls down. And that's really the way it works. Stress is really accumulative. And unless, we're doing something about taking those rocks out on a daily basis or on a regular basis, we end up at this crisis point that you're talking about, where we have suicide, where we have substance use disorders, where we have family discord, where we have, issues that are, what we call acute care or treatment-based issues that we need to, approach with, with some kinds of a clinical intervention. But how can we begin to talk about being upstream and not, before we reach that point where someone's at the edge of the cliff and, the next little tap on the shoulder puts them over? What do you think are the kind of things we can do that can support the police so they don't reach that place?
Yeah, well, I think it's on multiple fronts, and you hit on one part of that. You talked about training, and you said we train officers to respond to these incidents. I would push back and say we don't give our officers enough training. We train them how to respond to a crisis, but what I've really, you take a step back and look at from the outside, we don't provide enough training to the officers on how to recognize that there will be stressful impacts on themselves and then how they cope with that stress. We have this culture in policing where we have this strong, tough mentality, resilient mentality that, like you said, bounce right back. We go to a call, we see, tragic events and just deal with it. And it's not just police, doctors, nurses, particularly now on the front lines with COVID, fire, EMS, those stresses, like you say, they do accumulate. So I think training is a significant, place that we can do a better job in not just the response piece, but in how to cope with that. What we've, what I've seen, and there's a Massachusetts organization called Blue Help. It's a nonprofit that tracks, brings awareness to police officer suicides and mental health. And, unfortunately, from 2018 to 19, officer suicides, went up significantly. And, I was just reading an article yesterday, actually, about a retired sergeant from Rochester, New York, talking, he wrote a book talking about, how mental health disorders impacted his career, and he contemplated suicide. So I think that the training and bringing the awareness at the academy and then sustaining that all the way through in-service training, superior officers, command staff level officers, making sure that they know that it's not just the critical incident stress management teams that we need to create to respond to those critical incidents, because there's going to be that stress, but it's training our command staff level personnel to recognize those daily occurrences. One of the things through IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police Association, is about 3 years ago, they put out the One Mind Pledge. It was a campaign to promote mental health awareness and training within police departments. And part of that pledge was to adopt good policy on how to respond to mental health crisis, to train your department in particular areas. And all officers, 100% of the officers had to be trained in mental health first aid response. That brings that awareness to officers on how to respond to those crises, but it really brings awareness for themselves to what to look for in themselves and fellow police officers. And then another piece to that training was crisis intervention team training, that 20% of your staff had to be trained in this crisis incident training, team response, which is critically important because, we had no tools on the tool belt in 1995 when I went to the police academy on this awareness on how to respond, but then really the awareness on how to deal with and cope with the stress yourself. So I think that's a real impactful place that we need to do a better job in law enforcement. We're seeing that shift, but just like we've recognized, through the public health experts about substance use and mental health disorders, we really need to do a better job and bring it to the next level on within law enforcement leadership on recognizing the stresses that our officers are placed under and the impact it has on them.
I think those are incredibly valuable suggestions in terms of how we can support the police and how we can, what kinds of programs that can be implemented that can create some resilience within the police department. The other piece of that I'd like to talk about, or I'd like you to have you address, Scott, is cultural change within the department. In other words, it's one thing to provide training to individuals and tell individuals, look, it's if you have a problem, my door is open, or it's okay to have a problem. It's okay to, if you're experiencing problems on or off the job, family issues, whatever, it's okay to talk about it. But is what needs to go on within the department, and what I'm really talking about, and if we're going to go right to the bottom line here, is that in many police departments across the country, it's just not macho. It's just not what's it, you have an expectation that it's right by some and not by all. Of course, I'm not trying to paint all with one broad brush, but there's a belief that if I have if I show a weakness, it says something about my quality as an officer, my ability to do the job. That show If I show that I kind of my human condition, my sense of feeling vulnerable and or having an emotional problem or any other kind of problem is a weakness. What needs to be done within the centers, within the systems, within the individual police departments, from the top down, to create an atmosphere where it's not that's conducive to people dealing with things early on.
Yep. So, and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think it absolutely starts at the top. As the chief, your command staff level all the way down, they need to know that you care about them, that we are, we're all fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. We all have, families that we have to go home to. They have problems. So I think recognizing that at the top, and then letting your command staff and your officers know that you care about them. A simple check-in every day, letting your command staff level know, hey, check in with your officers. How are you doing? I mean, a simple thing that I would do is, encourage, ask how's your family doing? If you knew and about a family problem or someone being under a sickness, show them that you care. Show them that you're compassionate and human. One of the things that, and I alluded to it early in my introduction, is, my early on career ambition was to be a teacher and a coach, all the way through, my children's, youth careers. I was as a coach. And at the same time as being a coach, I was known in the community as a sergeant, detective, and then a chief. And one of the things that I always stressed to my fellow officers and then to my, officers under my command was, be involved in your community. When I coached football, my son for 8 years, and about 4 years ago, at one point, I had 3 officers on the staff. And what it did is it gave the officers this sense of community, to be seen in a different light, and not being seen as the officer that you're going to respond to a problem, but hey, this officer is a regular person, loves football, is compassionate, and cares about their community. So, sharing that and showing that from the leadership. So as a leader, I was involved with, every community organization. I got involved with my local substance use coalition, but then I got involved with every other group in town. So getting involved and letting your officers know to be involved, but that you've got to do it from the top. And then one of the other big things is letting officers know that we recognize these mental health disorders, substance use disorders can strike anyone. So giving them an outlet and an opportunity to connect to a supervisor, knowing that that supervisor could connect them to care. And it's not just a simple EAP, it's changing that culture. When we would have a tragic incident, and I go back to my own career in 1995, that one of the first calls for service I responded to was a child struck by a car. And to this day, I can picture everything, the street, every time I drive past that location. I saw 2 sneakers, and the young boy had been knocked out of his shoes. And I'll never forget that. He passed away at the scene. And the next day I came into work, and, back in 1995, there really wasn't any kind of, follow up. Hey, how you, maybe an officer said, how are you doing? But there was really nothing else. And it's not just these tragic incidents, but it's those day-to-day ones, just those daily check-ins. How are you doing? I know your husband or wife may not be feeling well, showing that you care. So to me, that's critically important. And then just, looking after each other's health. In our department, we did about 5 to 10 of us would do CrossFit training, police officers. We actually went into a public safety competition for about 5 or 6 years in a row. letting the officers see you, in a different light, caring about your health, your nutrition, but also, in this competitive sporting environment outside of the workplace, really lent itself. And, in fairness to, I'm a CrossFit fanatic now, but again, it's an outlet for me outside of the department, but showing the fellow officer, these are the things that we can do, that leaders do, that they should be engaged in to help them deal with those stresses.
Right. So again, we're talking about things that they can do, and I think that one of the things that you brought up that is so important, uh, Scott. I keep wanting to calling you Chief Scott, but that's okay, because and the reason I want to do that, Scott, is to honor your service, which I think really needs to be honored. But we talk about the idea of providing these services, and one of the things you just talked about, which is so rich, is the need to connect with community, and for police to be seen as they are, human beings with who are fathers and sons and daughters and wives, and because we have male and female officers, of course, and I think that's incredibly important. And I think that really helps a lot with the cultural issues. And I think that's really, more of that is really needed. There was a one department where they kind of bulldozed the entire police department, and they built a new department. But what they did was they built it into a community center. So not only did you come in for adjudication, but you also came in to play basketball, or you came in to play an instrument in another room, or to have a community meeting and those kind of things. And I agree, those kind of things go really far in create in dealing with some of the cultural issues that we have. And we know that a lot of the outliers that people who often generalize from really hurt the police and don't see the majority who are these loving, caring, regular people who come to work every day, to serve and protect us. and I think that's lost. And I think the more that they having that extra piece, that extra cultural piece, where you're coming, not only are you putting your life on the line daily, but you're also feeling that you're not totally appreciated for doing that, just creates that other piece of stress that's so difficult. And you mentioned exercise, and I think that we know that exercise is good, even if you're not on the job. It's one of those things that's really important. But we also know that police also come home, and they have families, and the question then becomes, how do we not only pay attention to them, but how do we also pay attention to their families? And we know things like rotating shifts and some of the other kinds of things that are part of the job really create other kinds of stresses at home. And every time that the officer leaves the house, there might be a husband or a wife that's concerned about whether or not they're going to return. And we forget about those things. And how can we pay more attention to their, not only their life on the job, but their life off the job?
Well, I think looking, to engage with them, communication, learn about, supervisors, learn, engaging with their officers, but also looking for warning signs and symptoms, indicators that there are the stresses are impacting not only themselves, but their family members and loved ones, in offering those support services, through simple, engagements with, events that encourage family members to attend, open houses, opportunities where the police department can not only interact with the officers, but with their family members, but through the supervision piece, making sure that, your staff knows to, look for indicators that there may be problems at home, maybe, mental health issues evolving, sickness, tardiness. So some simple things, by recognizing those indicators, to engage, the officers in, at check-ins, to make sure that they're doing okay, or if there are any family issues, to offer them outlets. I mean, one of the things that I see across the board, we know that the divorce rate in public safety law enforcement is significantly higher. It's high across the country, but particularly in our profession. So, recognizing that is a potential, outcome of, missing these warning signs. So looking for those warning signs and then to engage the individuals is significant. I mean, one of the things, in 2015, the presidential task force came up with the 21st century policing, the 6 pillars of policing. And what I found particularly, important when you look at that is building trust and legitimacy in our communities, but also, one of the 6 pillars is officer safety and wellness. Looking out for our officer safety, but their wellness. Do you have a wellness plan? Are there infrastructures in place within the department that the officer can reach out to for help for themselves and or for their family members and loved ones? Very similar to the substance use disorder crisis. It's as important to provide resources for the person in crisis as it is for the person that lives with and or cares for that loved one, because they're having to deal with their own stresses while they're looking at their loved one in the throes of a crisis. So I think offering the support to those family members is critically important.
Right. I thank you, Scott. So, do you think that maybe it would be helpful? And I'm just throwing this out, for your comment based on your years of experience. There is there's science, and then there's life on the job, and somehow or other they both have to come together at some point to provide support. We want that to happen with a high level of compassion. I wonder if not, whether or not we can not only provide some kinds of help in creating that kind of cultural change that makes someone feel comfortable to come forward with a problem earlier on, long before they reach that crisis time. And can we, is there possible, maybe, I'm thinking about training not just for the rank and file, but training for the administration, for the chiefs and the assistant chiefs and the higher ups, so that they can create more of us, be more sensitized to needs, and maybe even using some screening tools that, and some of them are really not that complicated. For instance, accidents on and off the job, absenteeism, lack of turning in documents that they're supposed to turn in. I mean, we can go through a whole list of things, and what we're really looking for is not mistakes that people make, because everybody makes mistakes, and especially during stressful times. What we're looking for is the person who normally, and I know police don't produce widgets, but let me talk about in terms of widgets. Police that, normally the person who produces 12 widgets a day and is now producing 6. And and you seeing that and having some kinds of criteria, some kind of sensitivity that says, hey, look, if this person is normally at this level and now they're going to this level, maybe this is time for us to intervene, not to wait till they're, at the point where they need clinical or intervention of some sort, or something much more serious. Do you think there's some training around the folks that are making the decisions, that not just the rank and file? What do you think about that, Scott?
I mean, I think, to be honest, it has to start at the top first. It's got to start with the command staff, the supervisors, which, because if you don't have the buy-in and you don't recognize that at the top level, it's not going to matter at the rank and file, because they're not going to have anywhere to turn. So absolutely. And that's why I talked about, recognizing those indicators, those early warning symptoms, that this, from the sergeants, the frontline supervisors, first line supervisors, all the way up through to the chief of police. They absolutely, we need to improve our training mechanisms and, those screening programs. I mean, right now, if you looked across the country, you're not going to find many police departments, not that I know of, that are doing regular screenings and check-ins. We're doing a lot of organic work in the field, changing the way we perceive, substance use, mental health disorders, and changing the way we look at stress. But we need to really come up with, some data-driven supported strategies to really have an impact, because it's just what we've done with these crises and substance use and mental health disorder. We've got to have, and you alluded to it, you can do some programs and do some nice initiatives, but to have that formal training, it's going to educate your command staff to recognize and then where to turn for resources. But it's going to send that message all the way down to the patrol officers, because what we see is if you have the buy-in at the top, you're going to get the buy-in at the ground level. But if the officers are looking up that chain of command and don't see, the priority or the recognition, of the impacts that stress has on them, you're not going to have any, that success measure. So absolutely recognizing things at the top level and training them at the top level, which is why I brought up the mental health first aid response and the crisis intervention team training. It's geared at the mental health first aid response that everyone gets that training, but the crisis intervention team training is geared for those supervisor level positions so that they can be better equipped to, when their officers look to them, to provide the support and the resources in that, those mental health crises.
So we like to, and that sounds spot on. We like to talk about the shadow of the leader, and and it really, the idea that people do live in the shadow of the leader, and I agree with you. I think that does need to come from the top down if we're going to support people in that way. At the same time, one of the studies points out that less than 10% of the police departments across the entire country have the kinds of programs that you're talking about. So, and I say that in a kind way, Scott, not in looking down at them, but in saying that this is a need, and that how important it is that you're doing this kind of work, and how that you're a beacon of light for these, and how can we bring this message, because I think your message is a really important one, and and the entire issues of cumulative stress versus the on the job stress that they're accustomed to, the need for training, the need for the leaders to be trained, the need for crisis intervention, the need for early intervention, all of that makes a whole lot of sense, and we know that we get good outcomes with that. The question is, how can we how do you think that message, how do we get that message across the country? Because we have something like we're doing today with the First Responder Network, and I think that's really, and we have the police chiefs associations and places like that people like you can go to and have a voice, which is really important, because your voice is really a one that's based not only on knowledge, but based on the ground experience, and there's nothing you can substitute for on the ground experience. So that's what makes, and that's why it's such a wonderful thing that you're giving back to not only the profession, but to the community at this point in your life. And you need to be honored for that, Scott. And I think that's really wonderful. The question is, how can that be, relayed? How can that be generalized? How can that be communicated to all of the other 90% of the departments across the country?
It's really, it's no different than the challenge we're seeing right now, with, opioids, substance use, and mental health. To me today, it's still a challenge to get some, locations to, buy into, changing the way that we've made these approaches. So to me, it's critically important, which is why organizations like the International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP, it's at that top national level organization that, if they put forth, which is why it's spreading the message and supporting these initiatives, it's got to come from those large level organizations, and to look for best practices, which is why, with the One Mind pledge, when we took that pledge in Massachusetts, 135 of our police departments signed on, right away, and have seen that through. So it comes at these larger level, conversations, but it's really the willingness to engage and change. One of the things that, even in preparing to do our show here with you today, Dr. Bob, one of the things is, I looked at, some of the things I did as a chief, and really, hey, feel like, I was progressive and really looked to implement a lot of the 6 pillars. But as I was going back through stuff, I did a self-assessment, geez, could I have done more? And I think that's one of the things as a leader that we have to do, is be willing not to look at all the positive things that we're doing, but look at where the gaps are, and change the way these gaps, how we can fill those gaps, and recognize that we're not perfect, and not be afraid to recognize that there is a place or a hole in the organization, that a void that needs to be filled, and then to look to the experts. One of the things that I've learned best is stay within my wheelhouse, and early, particularly on the opioid crisis, is making sure that we have this front row seat to these mental health crises and substance use crises, but we are not the experts. The experts have the public health, behavioral health background. But I think what we do best in law enforcement that can do a more effective job is reaching out to those experts. So for particular, on these situations where there are screening tools available, where there are indication, software programs that are available to recognize and to help, connect officers, to the resources they need to deal with the stress, to be willing to bring those experts into the fold. And that's why I talk about our initiative, this multi-sector approach. We've got to break down these barriers, and the stigma is still so strong with mental health disorders, particularly in law enforcement, that we know that, officer suicides are going up. We need to be willing to recognize that we're not being effective in this area. We need to change the way we're doing business. And it comes at that leadership level, but on the national levels, getting the organizations involved, IACP working with the National Alliance of Mental Health, working with NAMI and all the experts, bringing those experts to the table and bringing the community to the table, listening to the community about those issues.
Thank you, Scott. In the time we have left, let's see if we can refocus a little bit. And I thought those are such valuable recommendations that you're making, and I've been taking copious notes because I think that you really have a whole lot of wisdom. Let's, in the time we have left, let's see if we can talk a little bit about what kinds of resources are available. So, cultural change is important, but look, it doesn't happen overnight. We know that we need cultural change. And what I mean by cultural change within organizations is, creating organizations where it's okay to ask for help. Creating organizations that do recognize early signs of problems, that create resources for people, that support, mental health and substance use treatment for people who need it and when they need it and don't see it as a weakness. That those kinds and dealing with stigma and all of those things that we can list here for the rest, for hours. And those are important. And I don't want to in any way minimize the need to be doing those things, and we need to start doing them now, not later, because as you said, people, we have this suicide rate, which is really tragic. But at the same time, all of those kinds of changes take time. They're not going to happen overnight. They're progressive and they're transformative, but they take time to happen. The question is now, given today, we have COVID, we have arrests on the, we have protests on the street, we have violence, we have all of these things, we have political issues, we have social issues, all of the, and with COVID, all wrapped in a COVID, under a COVID umbrella. All of that needs to be dealt with today. What are some of the things? Let's talk about some of the resources. And I can name a few, but I'd like you to name a few as well from your perspective, because I know you connect people to resources. And I'll talk about some others that people can also come to. But I think we should take the rest of our time to give people some direction.
Sure. Well, if we're talking, as we're talking officer, suicides and, traumatic stress events, I mean, the one organization that I've been connected with, that is now, out there nationally is the Blue Help based in Worcester, Massachusetts. And for those that aren't familiar with it, if you go to bluehelp.org, it's a group that is, a 501c3 that advocates for those officers who have suffered post-traumatic stress, families that have lost loved ones to suicide, officers to suicide. So that would be a resource for specifically for police officers, suffering from stress. On the larger scale, on the mental health, substance use disorders, I mean, this, again, starting at the top, the International Chiefs of Police is a great resource to then connect you to the different resources. We're part of a collaboration called the Police Treatment and Community Collaboration Initiative, PTAC, which has really brought all of the different, stakeholders in this behavioral health world together to eliminate those barriers and work cohesively across the board. So those would be two places that, in particular, I would, direct people to, because within those networks, you're going to get connected to the whole host of experts.
That's fantastic. And on the macro level, those are really great resources. Let's talk about on the individual level, when you have someone who needs help, not just not for organizational help, but for individual help. What do you suggest are good resources, and for people who, I'm not sure whether they need, they're kind of beginning to feel out of sorts. Life is not, does not provide the quality that it once had. What do you suggest for people like that?
Well, certainly within these agencies, if we're talking internally with the agencies, the employee assistance program should be able to, direct you. And if it doesn't, talking with a mental health clinician, social worker, who has that specific background in these areas, again, staying within our lanes, within our wheelhouse, a mental health clinician, sitting down, talking to them, offering the opportunity to share with others is a critically important. I mean, in our region here, in my department, we have a mental health clinician embedded within the department so that she is available not only to those in crisis, but those who just want to, talk and then get connected to treatment. So the clinician can act as that entry point, that first step into the, the treatment world that then can direct someone to seeking assistance. Most, communities now have some, recognized between substance use and mental health disorders, those resources. The one thing I'm always mindful of is, and I think, I see it all the time, is, making sure that you're following a path of, evidence-based practices. Unfortunately, there are many organizations out there that do great work, but then unfortunately there are others that, try to capitalize on others' vulnerabilities. So getting connected to the local resources in your region that have that evidence-based practices is significant.
Thank you. And I would add to that, and I think those are all great recommendations, Scott. And I would add to that some other resources, certainly, there are other organizations, there are grassroots organizations that police can get involved with as well. And some of those can be found online, and some of those they can get through referral. I make my personal website available for not necessarily for therapy, but for advice. If we can direct people, because during these times we're always open to directing people, and so that will be on the website here as one resource, and we're always willing and open to do that. And we do have there is a coalition, a growing coalition of people around the country that are really becoming more and more sensitized to the needs of the police and of first responders in general. And for those folks, we can help connect you to those folks when that's needed as well. So it really, as you point out, Chief Scott. I just need to honor you in that way. And then we need to point out that something that you said that I think is really important, uh, among the many things that you said that were important, is that we need to collaborate. It's not it's not simply what the police can do, but it's what the police can do with the social scientists, with the treatment people, with evidence based and research based, and how can we all come together and support each other, without any vested interest in our own on ourselves, to see the bigger picture and to develop a bigger and see the bigger picture, and how can we work together to create these kinds of coalitions for change that support the police and other first responders as well, but particularly the police. And the why I say particularly the police is because of the high level of stress that if we wanted to a poster child for stress, we take a poster person. I say child because I think back to some of the poster children, but I think of a poster person for stress. If I had to pick one person, it would be someone on the job. And so I think that you know continuing to have these kinds of talks, continuing to bring the word, put out the word with a level playing field, with the kind of honesty and transparency that I think you bring to the table, Scott, because I think that that's what's required, and we need to be open and honest about not only what our needs are, but who we are as human beings, and how our and how our needs as fathers and mothers and sisters and brothers are no different than those needs of people in other occupations, and who are doing other kinds of work, except that every day we need to go into harm's way. Any closing thoughts you have before
Yeah.
we?
So you hit on something that really, resonates with me. Relationships build partnerships. Partnerships lead to that true collaboration. And I really think that at the grassroots, and that's really where we can have the most impact, is at that grassroots level. Developing these partnerships with different stakeholders, with different partners, that leads to true collaboration. Because and I would push back a little bit and say it's not just police. It's our fire and EMS partners. It's our doctors, our EDs, our nurses that are dealing with this COVID crisis on a day-to-day basis. And this national crisis. So it's that collective group. We're all in this together. So I can't stress enough to organizations and individuals that are looking to help others. It's really true collaboration. Eliminate those barriers. One of my colleagues says it's best. Don't let a self-imposed barrier get in the way of a true collaboration that's going to help others. So I always look to, how do we break down that barrier? Don't tell me that we can't do this. How can we do it? And I, particularly in the light of current crises that we're dealing with now more than ever, we need to look, how do we break down those barriers?
And I'd like to say humbly that I think we've started to do some of that today, in our conversation with myself and you. And I think that uh, I can say to the people who are watching that our doors are open, because we discussed that, and doors are open to creating more of conversations, greater coalitions, because it's everyone's input. It's not just mine. It's not just yours. It's the need. It's the needs on the ground. It's the needs of people who are stakeholders. It's the needs of the observers in the community as much as it is the rest of us. And like you said, not just in the police, but in so many of the first responder organizations. And I think the more we're doing these kinds of forums, the more that we're creating these kinds of possibilities, I think the greater chance we have to create, coalitions for change that make sense. And I really think that I want to thank you so much for your time today, Scott, and for your service, both in the past and in the present. So thank you so much for being here and being part of our First Responder Network. And thanks to C4 Recovery Solutions for their part in this. And
Hey, Bob, before you wrap it up, we actually have an audience question if we have time for a quick one.
Sure, we do.
Sure. It's these EBPs are peer reviewed. Is that correct?
Say that again.
It says these EBPs are peer reviewed. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what they mean by that question. I need more. When they say peer reviewed, are they talking about peer reviewed? When I'm talking about research, is whether the research is peer reviewed.
He just posted a follow-up that says evidence-based practice.
No, of course I know what evidence-based practice is. I'm just trying to. When they say peer reviewed, I'm not sure what they mean. I'll say this about evidence-based practice, and we really don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm really welcome to have that person contact me offline. But I will say the most important thing about evidence-based practice is not peer review. It's generalizability, and it's the ability to replicate that program within other venues. And that's always the challenge with evidence-based. And there are many different levels of evidence-based that I could not possibly go into today. But respectfully, I would be more than happy to have that discussion offline with this one person, or we can, if it's important to other people, whoever would like to become involved, just contact me on my website, and I'll be glad to talk extensively about evidence-based practices, because it's something I've been very closely involved with for many years. But I will suggest that you stop using, if I stopped using the term evidence-based practices, and now the term that I like better is practice-based evidence. And if you think about that, just think about that for a moment. Practice-based evidence is really the direction we're moving in. And we're kind of leaving behind, clinically speaking, evidence-based practices. But anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. And if not, please contact me offline.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
And thank you.